When grocery store manager Derek Walsh spotted an elderly woman with an expired coupon, he thought this was the perfect moment to flex his authority and teach her a lesson about following rules. But he had no idea that the quiet man in simple clothes standing behind her in line was Pope Leo XIV himself. What happened next didn't just shock everyone in the store. It reminded the world why true leadership means protecting the vulnerable, not humiliating them. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Margaret Chen, 78, carefully counted the items in her shopping basket at Miller's Grocery. Her arthritis-gnarled fingers held a small stack of manufacturer coupons she'd clipped from the Sunday paper, each one representing savings that mattered on her fixed Social Security income. Behind her in line stood a man in simple dark clothing, quietly reading a small prayer book while waiting his turn. His humble appearance gave no indication that he was Pope Leo XIV, who had dismissed his security detail earlier that morning, to walk through Rome like an ordinary person. At Register 3, Derek Walsh adjusted his name tag and surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of a man who enjoyed every minute of his authority. At 34, he'd worked his way up to assistant manager and took pride in running what he called a tight ship. His employees knew better than to bend the rules when Derek was watching.
Next!
Derek called out with practiced efficiency. Margaret approached the counter, placing her items carefully on the conveyor belt. A loaf of bread, some canned soup, medication from the pharmacy, and a small bouquet of flowers.
Good morning.
She said softly, her accented English revealing her immigrant origins.
I have some coupons.
Derek's expression immediately soured. He'd dealt with coupon customers before, always trying to game the system, always looking for handouts.
Let me see them,
he said, extending his hand with obvious reluctance. Margaret handed over her carefully organized coupons. Derek snatched them roughly, scanning each one with theatrical scrutiny. His eyes lit up with cruel satisfaction when he spotted his opportunity.
Ma'am,
he said loudly enough for other customers to hear.
This coupon expired 3 days ago.
Margaret's face flushed with embarrassment.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't notice. Could you possibly?
No, I could not possibly.
Derek interrupted, his voice rising.
Rules are rules. I can't just ignore expiration dates because you can't be bothered to read.
The other customers in line began to watch the confrontation unfold. A young mother with 2 children looked uncomfortable. A businessman checked his watch impatiently, but the quiet man behind Margaret simply observed, his kind eyes taking in every detail.
I understand.
Margaret said quietly.
I'll pay full price. It's only 50 cents.
50 cents here, $1 there.
Derek announced to the growing audience.
That's how stores go out of business, because people think rules don't apply to them.
He held up the expired coupon like evidence in a trial.
You know what I think? I think you saw this was expired and tried to slip it past me. Thought you could take advantage of a busy store?
Margaret's hands began to tremble.
No, sir, I would never.
Sure you wouldn't.
Derek sneered.
You people always have some excuse.
The phrase hung in the air like poison. Several customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Behind Margaret, Pope Leo XIV closed his prayer book softly, his attention now fully focused on the scene before him.
Sir,
Margaret said, her voice barely audible.
I made an honest mistake. I've been shopping here for 15 years. I've never tried to cheat anyone.
Derek leaned across the counter, his voice dripping with condescension.
15 years of what? Trying to scam us with expired coupons? Because that's what this is, a scam.
Tears formed in Margaret's eyes. The young mother behind Pope Leo whispered to her children to look away. The businessman muttered something about holding up the line.
Maybe we should call security,
Derek announced loudly.
Make sure you're not carrying any other accidentally expired coupons.
That's when Pope Leo XIV stepped forward.
Excuse me,
he said quietly, his voice carrying a gentle authority that made Derek pause mid-sentence. Derek turned, ready to snap at whoever was interrupting his moment of triumph. Instead, he found himself facing a man whose calm dignity was somehow more commanding than all his bluster.
I couldn't help but notice this lady seems distressed,
Pope Leo said, his eyes moving from Derek to Margaret.
Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding.
Derek's chest puffed out with renewed arrogance.
No misunderstanding, pal. This woman tried to use an expired coupon, and now she's playing the victim when I caught her.
I see.
Pope Leo nodded thoughtfully.
And you believe she did this intentionally?
Of course she did,
Derek shot back.
You think someone accidentally doesn't notice a date right there in black and white?
Pope Leo stepped closer to Margaret, his voice filled with genuine concern.
Ma'am, how is your eyesight?
Margaret touched her cheek where a tear had fallen.
Not so good anymore, I'm afraid. The diabetes, it's affected my... I try my best to read everything carefully, but sometimes...
Derek rolled his eyes dramatically.
Oh, here we go. The sob story.
This woman has difficulty seeing.
Pope Leo said, his voice still gentle but carrying a new note of steel.
She made an innocent mistake.
And you are?
Derek demanded, finally irritated enough to challenge this interruption.
Someone who believes in treating our elders with respect.
Pope Leo replied simply. Derek laughed harshly.
Respect? She tried to steal 50 cents from this store. Where I come from, we call that theft.
The word theft hit Margaret like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, her hand gripping the counter for support.
I'm not a thief,
She whispered.
I've never stolen anything in my life.
Sure.
Derek sneered.
And I'm the Pope.
A shocked silence fell over the checkout area. Several customers gasped. The businessman's phone froze halfway to his ear. Even Derek seemed to realize he'd said something significant, though he couldn't quite grasp what. Pope Leo XIV's eyes met Derek's directly. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to addressing kings and presidents.
Funny you should mention that,
He said softly. Something in his tone made Derek step back slightly. The other customers leaned forward, sensing the energy in the store had fundamentally shifted.
I'm sorry, what?
Derek stammered.
I said it's interesting that you mentioned the Pope,
Leo replied, reaching into his jacket.
because I happen to have some identification that might surprise you.
He pulled out a simple leather wallet, withdrawing what appeared to be an official Vatican document. Derek's eyes widened as he stared at the papal seal and the name. His Holiness Pope Leo XIV, Robert Francis Prevost.
That's fake.
Derek whispered, but his voice had lost all conviction. The young mother pulled out her phone and quickly typed. Within seconds, her face went pale.
Oh my God,
She breathed.
that's really him. That's really Pope Leo XIV.
The businessman abandoned his call entirely, his phone clattering to the floor. Other customers began gathering, phones emerging as word spread through the store like wildfire. Derek's face drained of all color.
Your Holiness, I didn't know.
Of course you didn't.
Pope Leo said gently.
But tell me, Derek, and that is your name, isn't it? Would it have mattered? Should this woman be treated differently based on who was watching?
Derek opened his mouth, but no words came out. His hands were shaking visibly now as the full weight of his behavior crashed down on him.
Let me ask you something else.
Pope Leo continued, his voice remaining compassionate despite Derek's cruelty.
When you look at Margaret here, what do you see?
Derek glanced at the elderly woman, who was now staring at Pope Leo with wonder and disbelief.
I see.
Do you see a thief?
Pope Leo asked.
Or do you see a woman who's lived through hardships you can't imagine? Someone who came to this country decades ago with nothing but hope. Someone who raised children, worked multiple jobs, contributed to her community for 7 decades.
Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation.
Your Holiness,
She whispered.
you don't know me.
I know enough.
Pope Leo replied warmly.
I see a woman who carries flowers in her basket because even on a tight budget, she believes in bringing beauty into the world. I see someone who buys medicine she probably can't afford because she wants to stay healthy for her family. I see dignity, courage, and grace under pressure.
He turned back to Derek, whose arrogance had completely evaporated.
What I don't see, Derek, is a thief. What I see is a human being deserving of respect, regardless of whether her coupon is expired or whether the Pope happens to be standing behind her in line.
The store had grown completely quiet, except for the soft clicking of phone cameras capturing this extraordinary moment. Even the cashiers at other registers had stopped working to watch.
Now,
Pope Leo said, reaching into his wallet again.
let me take care of Margaret's groceries.
No!
Derek blurted out.
Your Holiness, please. I'll honor the coupon. I'll pay the difference myself.
Pope Leo studied Derek's face for a long moment.
Why?
Because you're the Pope, and I...
Wrong answer.
Pope Leo said softly.
Try again.
Derek swallowed hard, his eyes moving from Pope Leo to Margaret. who was watching him with a mixture of hope and fear.
Because? Because she deserves to be treated with kindness. Because I was wrong.
Better.
Pope Leo nodded.
But let me ask you this. Will you remember this lesson tomorrow when there's no pope in line behind the next elderly customer who makes a mistake?
Derek's voice was barely audible.
Yes, Your Holiness.
And will you teach your employees that a store's true measure isn't found in rigid rule enforcement, but in how it treats the most vulnerable customers who walk through its doors?
Yes.
Derek whispered, tears now streaming down his face. Pope Leo reached out and placed a gentle hand on Derek's shoulder.
Good. Because Derek, you have a choice to make right now. You can continue being the kind of manager who finds power in humiliating people, or you can become the kind of leader who finds strength in lifting them up.
The young mother in line had started crying. The businessman was furiously typing notes on his phone. Margaret stood in amazement as customers throughout the store began abandoning their shopping to witness this extraordinary moment.
Margaret,
Pope Leo said, turning to the elderly woman.
Would you allow me to pray with you?
Margaret nodded, unable to speak. Pope Leo took her weathered hands in his and spoke quietly.
Lord, bless this dear woman who has shown such grace under trial. Bless her family, her health, and her days ahead. And help all of us remember that every person we meet carries the image of God, deserving of our love and respect.
When he finished, Margaret was sobbing openly.
Thank you.
She whispered.
Thank you for...
You were never invisible,
Pope Leo assured her.
Sometimes we just need to remind others to look with their hearts instead of their pride.
Derek stepped forward hesitantly.
Ma'am, Margaret, I owe you an apology. A real one. What I said, how I treated you, there's no excuse.
Margaret looked at him for a long moment, then nodded graciously.
Apology accepted, young man. We all make mistakes.
The simple forgiveness in her voice broke something open in Derek's chest. He turned to Pope Leo with desperate eyes.
Your Holiness, how do I make this right? How do I become better?
Pope Leo smiled.
Start tomorrow. When the next customer makes a mistake, remember Margaret. When someone needs help, offer it. When you have the power to show mercy, use it.
He paused thoughtfully.
And Derek, that coupon policy, perhaps it needs revision. Maybe expired coupons should be honored for customers over 65 or those with medical conditions affecting their vision. What do you think?
Derek nodded eagerly.
Yes, absolutely. I'll talk to the owner today.
As Pope Leo prepared to leave, declining Derek's frantic offers to pay for his own groceries, customers throughout the store approached Margaret. Offers to drive her home, invitations to dinner, requests to help with future shopping. The community that had stood silent during her humiliation now rallied around her with overwhelming support. A local news crew arrived within the hour, having been alerted by social media posts that were already going viral. They found Derek behind the customer service counter, personally helping elderly customers and checking expiration dates with a magnifying glass he'd purchased from the pharmacy section.
Everything changed in that moment.
Derek told the reporter.
I thought I was enforcing rules, but I was really just being cruel. The Pope, he showed me what real authority looks like. It's not about power over people. It's about service to them.
Margaret, surrounded by new friends from the store, smiled at the camera.
I came in for groceries and left with something much more valuable, proof that there are still good people in this world. And they include a holy man who chose to shop for bread just like the rest of us.
The story spread across international media within days. The grocery store chain announced a new policy honoring expired coupons for senior citizens and those with medical conditions. Derek was promoted to store manager and began implementing customer service training, focused on dignity and respect. But perhaps the most powerful change was in Derek himself. 6 months later, he would start a nonprofit helping elderly immigrants navigate daily challenges like grocery shopping, paying bills, and accessing medical care. When asked why, he always gave the same answer.
Because someone who could have ignored my cruelty chose instead to teach me how to love.
Margaret kept the expired coupon framed in her kitchen, a reminder that even our mistakes can become moments of grace when met with understanding instead of judgment. And Pope Leo XIV continued his walks through Rome, believing that the most sacred encounters often happen not in grand cathedrals, but in ordinary places where ordinary people choose between kindness and cruelty, between seeing humans as problems to be managed or souls to be cherished. Sometimes the greatest miracles occur not through divine intervention, but through the simple decision to treat each other with the dignity that every child of God deserves. God bless you,